Uh, you make the observation in your book, and you say that you have said it many times when you were president of the United States, that no president is ever going to desert Israel, right?
Correct. I put it more bluntly. I said, as I told congressional leaders during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, no American president will let Israel go down the tube. Right. Democrat or Republican, it's not an issue.
That is stated fairly categorically, and yet in your book you make it clear at the same time that Israel really is not of any enormous strategic value to the United States anymore.
That's correct.
So why then would the United States continue to burden itself with huge loans, in some cases outright grants, to the Israelis, jeopardize possibly young American fighting men, when there is no strategic value involved, or little strategic
Because the
value?
United States is concerned by more than strategic values. That's maybe a weakness, but it's the way we are. And there are moral issues involved here. We don't have an alliance with Israel, as you know. They're not an ally of the United States in a technical sense. But we have a bond to Israel that's much stronger. It's a moral commitment. A moral commitment because of what happened during the Holocaust, and a moral commitment because it is a democracy, the only democracy in that area. And under the circumstances, that is why American presidents and the American people in the future will support all out the survival of Israel if it's attacked.
You've always been a very tough, pragmatic man. And I just wonder if you were the president of Israel and you heard Richard Nixon talking that way, or for that matter, heard any sitting American president talk that way, and say, but there's really no strategic value anymore, how much faith would you place in that kind of a moral commitment if push really came to shove?
If I were the president of Israel, I put a great deal of faith in it because of the track record of the United States, and also because he would know that that is the way the American people are. There is no doubt whatever of our commitment to Israel.
A relationship very much in focus today, with Israel marking a month since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on its people. Good evening and welcome to the Nixon Seminar on Conservative Realism and National Security. I'm your host, Mary Kissel with Stevens. We welcome our co-chairs, Secretary Mike Pompeo and Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who will be joining us shortly, our distinguished seminar members, and of course, we welcome you, our viewers. So there's a lot to get to in tonight's seminar. Secretary Pompeo, I want to kick it off with you. It has been a month since October 7th. Let's start by just asking the basic question: what progress have the Israeli forces made? What have you learned in that month? Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mary. It's great to be with you all again. Look, I don't have the most current tactical update, although I did see some information now 36 hours old, and I was in the Middle East over the past 2 weeks a good deal. The Israelis will ultimately be successful if we permit them to be, and you can see that progress. So look, we've got a small opening where we're allowing an even bigger group of people being held by Gaza than just the hostages having the chance to get out at Rafah. We can now see that they have largely been able to close off Gaza to exit and entry. That is, they can control the entry points in and out of the city, where it appears most of the leadership of at least the operational level Hamas figures are continuing to reside in tunnels inside of the city. At least the Israelis continue to believe that. And so they are methodically beginning to do what it is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think nearly every Israeli agree, is not only the right thing to do, but the necessary thing to do. And they will achieve something that approximates the objective that they have laid out: the decimation, the disfiguration, the capacity to take down the infrastructure that has supported not just the attack of October 7th, but we've seen this time and time again. They're going to take it down once, if not once and for all, but once in a way that creates real space and real protection for the people of Israel.
Alex Wong, you heard President Nixon there talking about the U.S. interest in Israel, said that we have a special bond. How would you characterize our national interest there beyond the moral obligation to support Israel?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree that there's a huge moral valence to our partnership with Israel and our support for Israel, and the fact that without Israel, Jews around the world would be under threat. That is why Israel is necessary. But beyond that, there is I do quibble. I would disagree a little bit with the former president. There is strategic value. If you imagine a Middle East without Israel, without a democracy, without a technologically forward modern society, it would be one that in large part is dominated by Iran. And there would not be a pillar in the Middle East to provide balance and to provide incentives for our Gulf allies to modernize and join forces with and stand more unified with both Israel and the United States. So there's strategic value in providing stability in the Middle East and having Israel there. So beyond the moral component, I do believe there's strategic value there, and therefore more incentive and more impetus for us, more reason for us to support Israel in its war.
Mr. Secretary, in his writings, President Nixon once called the Persian Gulf the oil jugular of the West, a pretty evocative phrase there, as another reason beyond the moral imperative and maybe the stability that Alex talks about, that we care. Because even though if we opened up our energy taps, the Gulf and that region of the world, the stability of that region is still critical to energy markets. Is that another reason why the support of Israel remains in our national interest?
Look, it's deeply in America's interest to have expanded set of trade and in the energy space in particular. It's true. The United States has the capacity to be less dependent on Middle Eastern crude oil and natural gas products than it did in President Nixon's time. But that doesn't mean that it's not a global market and a global commodity where price isn't set by total supply in the world. And so were it the case that the Strait of Hormuz or the Bab el-Mandeb were to be closed, much like we've seen the travails in the Black Sea as a result of what's going on in Ukraine, that doesn't take but a couple of days before those costs, those inflationary pressures hit the United States of America and every single family inside of our country. And so it is absolutely the case that the United States has a deep and abiding interest in ensuring that the capacity to move energy around the world, including through the Middle East and its waterways, remains available and open.
Kim, I want to turn to you. Welcome tonight. Iran has been universally, I think, acknowledged to be the main backer of not just Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, all of which are committed to the eradication of Israel. Is there any indication that there's been a focus on that from the U.S. point of view in terms of action and not just rhetoric?
Well, obviously, I served with Secretary Pompeo and you and others in the Trump administration, and it's nice to be able to be with all of you today. So I can't speak for the current administration, but to me, there's no question that Iran is the instigator in this. They're the opportunist in this. They're the destabilizers in this. And they're far from done prosecuting this proxy war with Israel. And I just would really like to hear from Ambassador O'Brien and Secretary Pompeo, who are more read into the situation with Iran that I am. But it's very troubling. And beyond Iran, I'm also troubled with what is happening in our own country. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But we have elections today. And we'll be getting those results back this evening. And it will be interesting to see if there's any reaction to a feeling of anti-Semitism that's happening in our country right now. But we'll talk about that in a bit.
Well, there's so many angles to cover. I'm going to try to give everybody equal time tonight. Ambassador O'Brien, it's great to have you with us, co-chairing the Nixon Seminar with Secretary Pompeo. The Secretary went over kind of the tactical aspects, Israel's commitment to root out Hamas. We've spoken a bit with Alex about the national interest of the United States in supporting Israel, the moral issue, the stability of energy markets. From your point of view, Ambassador O'Brien, what have you learned in this last month since October 7th and that horrible day, whether it's about Israel's commitment, Iran's terrorism, or the relationship with the West? Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you, Mary. It's great to be with you and great to be with the Secretary and the whole team. Look, I think the first thing we've been reminded of, it's not a new lesson, but it's a lesson that we keep being reminded of, and that is that evil exists in the world. And when we look at what happened on October 7th, it was just no way to describe it other than just pure evil. We had a group of psychopathic serial killers turned loose on the people of Israel. And I've been to those towns. I've been to Surat. I've been to the kibbutz in the area. And to have these even call them terrorists, it gives them too much of a good name, running wild, murdering innocent women, children, babies, elderly. This is not collateral damage that took place as a result of an attack on military bases. This was the wanton slaughter of Jewish people. And we haven't seen this since the Holocaust, since the Eisengruppen that used to follow the Wehrmacht around to towns in Eastern Europe and slaughter Jews. And we need to keep in mind the evil that took place. Now, it was perpetrated by Iran. There's no question about it. Hamas should have begun without the Iranians giving them the go-ahead. And Secretary Pompeo and I saw this when we were in office. We have three great geopolitical rivals. We've got Iran, Russia, and China. And since this administration's taken office, Russia has invaded Ukraine. Iran has now essentially invaded Israel through Hamas and continues to threaten Israel with Hezbollah and its own military means, its own ballistic missiles. And we're waiting for the other shoe to drop with Xi Jinping and China and Taiwan. So the world has gotten very dangerous. But the lesson that I think we take away from this is that evil exists. We've got to fight it. It's a time for moral clarity. It's a time for Americans to stand behind the people of Israel who suffered a terrorist attack on a per capita basis, which is worse than 9/11 for us by far. And there's no room for equivocation. There's no contextualizing this. As a former President Obama tried to put this in context and claim that everyone's complicit. Everyone isn't complicit. Hamas is complicit. Hamas killed innocent civilians in southern Israel, and they're now holding hostages as human shields, and they're using their own people as human shields. All the blood that's being spilled in Gaza today is 100% on the heads of Hamas. And we need to make sure that everyone keeps that in mind and we can continue to repeat it, because there's no moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel and the war that's going on. Israel needs to root Hamas out, branch and root and trunk of the tree and hopefully be able to live in peace going forward with security.
Secretary Pompeo, you've been a student of Iran. You dealt with the mullahs and their terrorism when you were leading CIA, and you were one of the key actors in deciding that it was the time to take out Qasem Soleimani, a major blow to the IRGC, and one for which you still have a fatwa on your head. I wondered if you could speak to the nature of that regime and the prospect of trusting one of their proxies like Hamas to a quote-unquote pause, which is something that President Biden has floated in the last couple of days. Can you trust a regime like that and its proxies to honor a pause? How do you deal with them in the current situation?
Mary, I must say it's an odd thing. I'll credit President Biden for some of the comments that he's made. They've been pretty remarkable. He's clearly been impacted by what took place there personally. Could see the same thing when Secretary Blinken spoke from the Middle East as well. But it's odd to hear them speak about a humanitarian pause ad nauseum, but not ask for the hostages to be released. Right. It's somehow it conflates the moral understanding that I bring to this problem set, which is you can ask the Israelis to stand down for goodness sake, but they're still holding 200 plus, including Americans, hostage. It's an odd thing to place your priority in that place. And that really gets to the question that you asked, is that it is exceedingly unlikely that a pause, I'm not exactly sure what a pause means, but somehow creating space for something I don't understand how that gets at the primary set of objectives, which are to eliminate Hamas and get the hostages back home. Those are the two clearly stated objectives of the United States, certainly what Prime Minister Netanyahu is after. And I don't get how a pause even presents a remote likelihood of increasing either of those outcomes. We know Hamas will cheat. They'll take the fuel. They'll take the food. We're unlikely to see them do more than release one or two people. It's not to mitigate. Those two folks get to go home to their families. That's fantastic. But they chose to take this number of people for a reason, for enormous leverage. And so to think you're going to pause your way out of this thing while the Israelis are completing a very difficult mission, I think it is a mistake. And it's a mistake that is consistent with the mistake the Biden administration has made for coming on 3 years now, which is that they believe that there are moderates in Iran. They believe you can talk to these folks. They believe that you can, if you give them enough money, enough capacity, then goodness gracious, they will join a normal civilized society and they can be a constructive player in the Middle East. I think that's just, I think what happened on October 7th, I don't want to say that it proves it because I think it was already proved. But I think, and I hope there are a larger number of people who today see the folly of that theory.
Ambassador O'Brien, before you were National Security Advisor, you were the State Department's hostage negotiator. What are the realistic prospects for getting American hostages and Israeli hostages out of those tunnels? It's not like having a single individual held in Yemen or locked up in a jail in Sweden. It's a very different scenario. What say you?
Well, it's an incredibly complex problem. The real answer is probably military rescue, and that's a hard nut to crack for the military. I called on day one before we even knew there were Americans taken. When I thought it was just Israelis with 250 plus hostages, probably dispersed in various locations. There are going to be opportunistic situations that arise where the Israelis find one or two or four or five of them in one place or another. Maybe that'll happen on multiple occasions at the same time. We need to have our special operators forward deployed to assist the Israelis to rescue those hostages. And the only way you're going to get them is if you put enough military pressure on Hamas. A ceasefire is not going to cause Hamas to release the hostages. I mean, Secretary Pompeo and I know this because we worked on the case of Hader Golden, the Israeli IDF soldier who was killed in action, dragged back through the tunnels into Gaza, and his remains. He wasn't even alive. His remains were being held by Hamas for many years in order to leverage the release of Palestinian prisoners. And in fact, I was in Israel when I got called to be the new National Security Advisor, working on that case for Secretary Pompeo, and Hamas was utterly unreasonable then. They've now shown they've done something far worse. Not only have they taken the remains of a soldier, they've got 240 men, women, and children, and they're not going to release them. I applaud the effort of the Qataris to try and mediate and negotiate a resolution. Perhaps the Turks could get involved as well, perhaps the Egyptians. But the reality is Hamas has shown no interest in any sort of a deal to release the hostages. I think we're going to have to put continued military pressure on the ground. Yeah, that military pressure will hopefully lead to opportunities to rescue hostages. And the Israelis, of course, have special operators that are skilled in that very task. We do as well, and hopefully we'll be able to rescue some of the folks. But the idea that Hamas is going to release them, as the Secretary pointed out, is highly unlikely. I think the only way to get them out is what Bibi Netanyahu has done, is to send ground forces in, and we're going to have to try and rescue them.
So we've talked about the tactical progress in the war for the last month. We've touched on U.S. interests, national interest in helping Israel. We've talked about Iran, the primary sponsor of these attacks, the ultimate culpable actor here. Alex, is there something to be at least hopeful about, given that Hezbollah has not yet opened up the second front that has been feared? Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, of course, the Iran-backed terror group that resides in Lebanon, he hedged. He didn't really declare that he would open up that all-out front, which, let's be clear, would be possibly very devastating to Israel if it happened. Does that mean that the U.S. support for Israel, moving our military assets to the region, that show of quote unquote deterrence so far has worked?
Well, it's always dangerous to bank on hope in geopolitics and in matters of war. But look, the optimal path here is that the United States' warnings, its increased presence in the region, induces Hezbollah and Iran to stand down here, paving the way for Israel to prosecute this war and destroy Hamas, and return to a state where we can resume perhaps talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia on normalization and return some balance to the region. That's going to take time, and that's going to take fortitude from the Biden administration here. Not to cave politically, whether it's to domestic audiences or international audiences that fail to see that we're in a state of war now, or that Israel's in a state of war, and remain steely in providing that backing, both in terms of military deterrence and political space for Israel here. So there is a path. I think the Nasrallah speech was interesting. He built it up as a major announcement. There was a lot of publicity. I mean, it was almost like a movie opening or something. But then he backed down. I thought that was just very interesting, and I'm not sure how to read that other than that he is not wanting a war right now with Israel. And perhaps it's Israel's own show of resolve that shows that they're serious. So even if this is a two-front war, which is a problem, I mean, that is not a welcome development for Israel, but it's one that Israel is willing to fight. They're unified politically right now, and they're focused militarily. And I think Hezbollah sees that. That's a good thing.
Secretary Pompeo, you said you were just in the Middle East. Can you share any insights from countries like, for instance, Saudi Arabia or Qatar and their perspective on the Israel war?
Sure. So, we often talk about the Middle East generally, but this does vary certainly by nation. And the Omanis and the Kuwaitis would think about this differently than the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who are sitting right in the center of where the folks who leave Gaza might end up. They certainly don't want them for a host of reasons. The Saudis and the Emiratis know in the end there's going to be a lot of energy, a lot of money required to do the reconstruction. They're the likely folks who will be asked to provide the resources for that. Then you have Qatar, who has a complicated relationship here, who has provided support inside of Gaza, often at the direction and with the full complicity of the Israelis and the Americans. That is, the model for a period of time has been, we can work with Hamas. That is, we can provide them stuff and they'll not do really bad stuff. That's way oversimplified. So there's a variety of judgments about how to proceed. Look, each of them publicly says what you would likely expect them to say, right? They're asking for a ceasefire. Doesn't surprise me greatly. I would guess that in many of the quiet meetings that they're having, they know that what Hamas has done set back the entire region. They know that the economic development, the security and prosperity that had flowed from the Abraham Accords, the progress that had been made towards relationships between Israel and the Gulf Arab states was real and tangible and beneficial to them. And now this again. And every one of them would acknowledge that this is Iran in a way that, frankly, in a way that is more serious than the Biden administration has. They know who the bad actor is. They know that bad actor presents real threats to them. And so I think in their quieter moments, they know that this is something that was incredible setback in the progress that had been made over the last handful of years. And they want it to end. They want to try to find a way back. They know that it can't be October 6th again. They know that Hamas will ultimately be eliminated or nearly so. And I think they're hopeful that Iran will have been taught a lesson. The last thought is, while I was in the region, we had rockets being fired at American troops in Iraq. We had the continuation of an enormous campaign from the Houthis in Yemen to fire missiles and rocket systems into Jazan, into southern Saudi Arabia, another Iranian proxy. And so those countries' leaders understand that the threat, the problem child here is not the Israelis. The problem child here is the Ayatollah and President Raisi and the IRGC, the world's largest state sponsors of terrorists, who were trying to send a message to the world that we are still relevant. We can stop this very progress. And in our heart, we don't give, the Ayatollah sees those same videos you've seen, Mary, and it doesn't bother him a bit. And that's hard, I think, sometimes for us to understand. But I think the Gulf Arab states leaders understand that the Ayatollah doesn't give a whip for human life. And so they too share, although their public statements are different, I think they share an objective, which is to try and find a model that can deliver prosperity and stability in the region. And to do that, Iran can't feel that it is capable of doing precisely what it did on October 7th.
Such an interesting point of view, and it's actually a point of view that President Nixon laid out in his book, Beyond Peace. He talked about a so-called Muslim politique for a new era, where he encouraged the United States not to view the Muslim world as a unified kind of radical force, but, to see them as diverse as they actually are. I mean, Ambassador O'Brien, you too have spent an enormous amount of time in these parts of the world. Are there certain countries or actors who, might help us in either, convincing Iran or threatening Iran to pull back, to preventing that second front from opening up? I mean, who are our friends there, and who are the effective actors in the region, in your view, Ambassador O'Brien?
Well, the good news is, and I think Mike alluded to this, is that we have friends in the region, and we have governments that may say one thing publicly but are talking to us quietly, but they want us in the region. There's no individual country, and even no grouping of countries, that can stand up to Iran. Iran's a large country. It's got a massive ballistic missile program, which was funded by the sanctions relief that we provided, ironically, from the JCPOA. They just received another $6 billion in ransom payment for hostages. Secretary Pompeo and I got a number of hostages out of Iran without paying any ransom. Alex Wong was involved with Secretary Pompeo in getting hostages out of North Korea, no ransom paid. That's now been shot. And so the Iranians have a lot of money. They've got a big population, and they're driven by a messianic ideology that they believe they should be the custodian of the two holy places in Saudi Arabia, and also of what they call Al-Quds, or Jerusalem, in Israel. And that's what they're driving for. And the other countries will resist Iran and will stand up to them, but they need us backing them. And so when they see us retreating from the Middle East, when they see the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, when they see us wavering with the negotiations with the Ayatollahs, when we, all of us who were in office, everyone on the video today was in office on January 20th. When we left on January 20th, Iran had $4 billion in foreign currency reserves. Because the Biden administration's turned a blind eye to Iranian oil sales, Iran now has $70 billion in foreign currency reserves. Iran has gotten rich, very rich, in just 3 years. So our friends in the region will help us. They'll make peace with Israel. We had a number of countries that were very close to joining the Abraham Accords, or making some sort of strong détente with Israel. That's all been put on hold now. We'll have to see Israel defeat Hamas. I think Hezbollah, in their own self-interest, was smart. Alex Wong talked about this. Nasrallah, there's a lot of strum and praying, but at the end of the day, he doesn't want the Israeli Defense Force coming up to the Litani River and wiping out Hezbollah. And I think he realized the Iranians wouldn't get involved to help him. And so, Hezbollah will survive this war to fight another day. Hamas will not. And the Iranians will continue to engage in mischief. But hopefully the administration has learned, and those who've been trying to appease Iran for many years now, starting in the 8 years of the Obama administration, talking about reaching out our hand to the Ayatollahs and having them unclench their fists. That doesn't work. It hasn't worked. When we gave them the $150 billion in sanctions relief for the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, they used that to fund the Houthis, Kataib Hezbollah, Hamas, the Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And so the Iranians have a track record of taking what we give them and using it for further terrorism and further development of their ballistic missile program and the nuclear program. So once we go back to a peace restraint posture in the Middle East and stand up and let the world know we're going to stand up to the Iranians, we're going to have a number of Arab countries, more than we expect, that are going to flock to us and want to be on our side and want to have some sort of an accord with Israel to stand up to Iran. But when we're out of the Middle East and they're trying to stand up to Iran on their own, that's a very difficult request to make of them.
Well, and you've seen these bad actors flow into the region. China sending its naval ships into the near abroad, really, of Saudi Arabia, doing joint exercises with Oman. Alex Wong, we've heard that Russia reportedly may send surface-to-air missile systems to help Iran's allies should they come under attack from Israel. I think it was to Syria that was reported. Can you characterize for our viewing audience, as the U.S. has retreated, who has filled the void there, and can these alliances be easily untangled?
Right. Ambassador O'Brien kind of laid some of this out. It's interesting how much can change in a few short years. We were in a situation where the Trump administration adopted the mantra of no better friend, no worse enemy in the Middle East, and we had a historic a set of Abraham Accords, which unified Gulf Arab countries with Israel and with the United States. We had Iran on the back foot, and we had the prospect of stability, if not a completely satisfactory peace, but general peace across the Middle East. And you had the Biden administration come in, elevate Iran, be obsequious to Iran, trying to achieve a deal, granting them sanctions relief and funds, while at the same time demoting and denigrating our alliance with Riyadh and with Jerusalem. That has effects. And I think I'm not saying that led to these terrorist attacks, but it created conditions where we are not in a strong position and our allies are not unified in the Middle East in a strong position. So I don't think these alliances are lost, and I don't think China and Russia have occupied the space in this kind of retreat from the Middle East, if you want to call it that. But what we are seeing here is something that's been brewing for the past 10, 15, 20 years, which is the revisionist powers in Moscow, in Beijing, and in Tehran, prosecuting on fronts across the world a situation where they are trying to revise the international order and be oppositional and adversarial toward the free world. That's happened in Ukraine. China's trying to push that across the Indo-Pacific. And I think this is another example of that. After the attacks of earlier last month, we can see where those capitals put their chips. And that's the broader competition.
Well, the President of the United States has voiced very strong support for Israel. It echoes President Nixon. He said there was no doubt whatsoever about the American commitment to that country. And yet, Kim Reed, I want to go to you on another strand of this. There's just so much to discuss about this conflict, but I don't want to leave the discussion tonight without addressing the domestic politics of this in the United States, where we have seen certain political divisions open up, particularly on the left side of politics. We've seen pro-Hamas really protests in the United States and other Western capitals. Is this a surprise to you to see these divisions? Because one would think that back even in the 70s, there would be more unity than there is today. I mean, what has changed?
I am just so disappointed in what is happening in our country right now. Before I touch on that, I just wanted to remind all the viewers tonight, if you did not join us last month, members of the Nixon Foundation, including myself, we were in Qatar meeting with the foreign ministry just as all of this was taking place. And we were to go to Israel. because it was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And I know that Ambassador O'Brien truly appreciates what the Qataris are doing. We really need to get our hostages home, and we need to get all of the hostages out. And so much happens behind the scenes. And I just really pray for their safe return. Looking domestically, I want to point out a wonderful educational piece that ran in the Wall Street Journal by a George Washington University professor, Lorenzo Bendino. He's a professor of extremism. And it's entitled, How Hamas Won the Hearts and Minds of the American Left. And it goes back to October 1993 when the FBI was wiretapping a meeting of Hamas officials in Philadelphia. And they were there trying to figure out how to deal with the Oslo peace accords that had just been signed between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And they really wanted to sow division. And so on this tape, it says from one of the Hamas officials, let's not hoist a large Islamic flag, and let's not be barbaric talking. We will remain a front so that if the terror designation happens on Hamas, we will benefit from the new developments instead of having all of our organizations classified and exposed. I swear by Allah that war is deception. Deceive, camouflage, pretend that you're leaving while you're walking that way. And so what Hamas has done in our own country is really identified Israel with white privilege. And we're just seeing this absolute old-fashioned anti-Semitism happen in this country. We've seen the protests on the college campuses. I serve on an advisory council of one university, and I can tell you the faculty there are distraught. The students are distraught. And I will say I'm pleased that some of the donors are removing their funding from certain universities for what is absolutely reprehensible when it comes to anti-Semitic behavior and not calling it out. A friend of mine, Lisa Gable, she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Times week before last. She was moderating a panel and with some women and raised the issue of Israel. And how about let's look at the Holocaust museums and all of the donors and all of the supporters who have championed never having this happen again. And she said, I question the purpose of Holocaust museums and memorials if we readily dismiss evil through moral relativism. And to her dismay, side conversations happened with her one-on-one after that. And there was a chorus of yes, but Netanyahu is to blame. Yes, but Israeli policies are at fault. It's just, it's a rude awakening for the left, I believe. And what was most alarming to me is Black Lives Matter Los Angeles chapter. Right after this happened, they posted on their Instagram, quote, when a people have been subject to decades of apartheid and unimaginable violence, their resistance must not be condemned. Well, I'm thankful that President Biden equated Hamas with ISIS, and we really need to call all of these people out.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Mr. Secretary, you have seen some Democrats, like, for instance, Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, really going after the left wing of his party and voicing very strong support for Israel. So there does seem to be a split there. Is there any split on the right, or is really the debate going on in the political left in this country?
Mary, it's most of the debate is taking place inside the left. It's because it's really what Kim referred to, right? There is inside our elite institutions, our universities, frankly, some of our C-suites, there is this central thesis that has been proffered about the oppressor and the oppressed as a central model for how the world is shaped and who we should always be on one side or the other. And the big bad Republicans are always on the side of the oppressor. And we're the white hats that are on the side of the oppressed. And, I've heard people say, no one tonight said this, that this attack on October 7th generated this anti-Semitism. I just think it showed where people's minds have been for an awfully long time. It revealed a great deal. And just as Ambassador O'Brien talked about evil roaming the earth, that evil roamed to the earth on October 6th as well. It literally shone its face because there was weakness from those who care about human decency and dignity. And so, people talk about deterrence. You mentioned the strike on Soleimani. These things are only temporary, rather. You don't, what will, if they take out Hamas, will this take them out forever? No, they're going to be bad guys for as long until the good Lord comes and takes us all, right? That's how the story goes in Jerusalem, right? That very special place about which so much angst has been created. We have to be, those of us who care about the basic human rights, the capacity to exercise one's religious freedom, and all the things that we worked so hard on, we have to be mindful that there are bad actors in the world, and there is a price that must be paid in order to ensure that these bad actors don't have days like we saw on October 7th. And, Kim, you reminded me of something else, too. We haven't talked about two things. You talked about the home front and the issues here. When I think about the home front, I am also mindful that we've had several million people cross our border in the last 2.5 years. We have no earthly idea how many of them are connected to Iran, whether they are Hezbollah proxies or contractors working for Hamas. We should not be surprised that we didn't know that they were working on this plot for maybe a year inside of Gaza. They were meeting, training in Beirut. They were meeting and training in other places as well. I wonder if, as Director Wray said now 8 or 9 days ago, I wonder if there's not something we might be missing here at home as well. In the combination of a wide open southern border, ungoverned spaces inside of our own country and adjacent to our country, creates an enormous risk that the Iranians will say, you know what, we're not going to allow them to wipe Hezbollah, another piece from the chessboard. We'll just take direct action. Maybe it's in Brussels, maybe it's in Paris, maybe it's in Denver or Chicago. But we should never underestimate the capacity for this regime. They've done it here. They've attempted to kill people inside the United States before, for 20 years now. We should be mindful that they have been planning for that moment on October 7th for a long time, and we ought not take it as a fact that this was a one-day exercise, but might not be part of a larger strategic effort that will truly put pressure on the United States. And I wonder if this administration will continue to be as full-throated in support of Israel, were it the case we began to see leakage here inside the United States.
Well, you're raising so many important questions, Mr. Secretary, but let's stay on that intelligence thread, which we haven't really touched on in this particular seminar. There was clearly a massive failure of the Israeli intelligence services to see this attack coming, even though it obviously has been planned, as you said, for a very long time. Equally, it seems, I think, fairly clear that U.S. intelligence may not have seen it coming either. We didn't see 9/11 coming. It took us 10 years to find Osama bin Laden. Has there been an equal breakdown in U.S. intelligence that we need to be worried about?
Mary, I'm probably biased because I was a CIA director, and I say that. No, this was clearly a failure on many fronts, not just the capacity to identify the risk, but a complacency that had fallen upon Israel. They'd come to think they had an understanding that they misapprehended and didn't see, couldn't hear, didn't have the capacity to have people on the ground to see this coming. I think that's absolutely true. I do try to, it's not that I cut anyone any slack, but Mary, you saw some of this too, and I have to be a little careful here. Intelligence is hard work because you got to go with 100 for 100. And I've seen scores and scores of these things taken down at early stages all across the world. They missed this one in a way that fundamentally will reshape how Israel and Israel's own domestic politics, its own security. But we should always be humble about what it is we simply don't know. And that's why I brought these issues up here in the homeland. There's just always going to be things in the homeland. It's really the FBI that has the responsibility primarily than DHS. we should always be humble about the things that evil minds can do that are very difficult to play defense against.
Alex Wong, jump in.
Yeah, I echo a lot of those sentiments of Secretary Pompeo. Intelligence, prediction, preparedness is a hard job, and it's very difficult to second guess from the outside. But in the same way that the Yom Kippur War reshaped Israel's approach to intelligence and its strategic posture, I think you're going to see a review here. I mean, as Benjamin Netanyahu said, there will be a review once this war is complete and the country is secure. But in the same way, we should look at our own intelligence capabilities. And, beyond, whether we have enough people on the ground, whether we have the personnel structure is correct or the methods are correct. One question we always have to ask ourselves, whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere, is whether we are too comfortable in our strategic assumptions, whether we are falling back into confirmation bias of how we view a situation. And in this instance, I think there was an assumption on the part of American and other analysts, whether in Israel or elsewhere, that Hamas was generally contained, that it was all a matter of, quote unquote, mowing the lawn. Every now and then there would be a flare up of rocket attacks, but we had Iron Dome, and then we conduct an operation. And this was the recipe for stability. Again, unsatisfactory, but as good as we were going to get it. But clearly that wasn't the case. So there's going to be a rethinking. And this should be not just in Israel, it should be in our own intelligence services and our own broader strategic thinking as policymakers.
Yeah, I like that phrase, rethinking. Ambassador O'Brien, it seems as if, amazingly, some of the focus of Washington is not on winning this war against Hamas, but talking about already what comes next after Israel wins. I suppose that's prudent to do at some point, even though this war is only a month old. But you're still hearing the same quote unquote solution to this conflict, which is the two-state solution being aired in Washington. Is that realistic given what's happened and given what one member of Bibi's war cabinet said? Look, a two-state solution, a Palestinian state would entail a Palestinian military, potentially a Palestinian Air Force. If we thought about that, is that something that the state of Israel could countenance? What do you make of that lack of rethinking, as Alex put it, this reference to two states? I think you're on mute, Ambassador.
Yeah, let me just comment on something Kim Reed said just briefly and then address that issue. So I was down at the Baker Center at Rice University last week, along with, of all people, Hillary Clinton, who was coming to honor Secretary Baker for his 30 years at the Institute. And they put together a tremendous program down there. But as we walked in, there were probably 500 to 1,000 of these very privileged students at Rice University, a great university, screaming, "Burn Israel, burn," as we walked in. There was, of course, plenty of security and that sort of thing, but I was heartbroken. First thing, I wanted to walk over to the line, and of course, the security wouldn't let us do that, but I wanted to walk over and say, hey, have you been to Buchenwald? Have you been to Auschwitz? Have you been to the camps? Do you know what it means to say, "Burn Israel, burn"? And these kids are privileged kids. Most of them are white. There are surprisingly a lot of Chinese students among them, probably a few Palestinian and Arab students sprinkled in, and calling it the most vile anti-Semitic comments. And that takes me to your question about the two-state solution. One of the things we hear Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib talk about, AOC, is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, what does that mean? That's not talking about a two-state solution. That's talking about a solution where the Palestinians run the whole place. They have all the territory. There is no Israel, and there are no Jews. So it's not just that they want the land. They want to kill and exterminate the people there, 9 million Jewish people. So a two-state solution would be great. It makes you think about like Liechtenstein. You have a country without an army, with a basic police force. Monaco, someplace like that. And you know what? The Palestinians had that opportunity. The Gaza Strip is on a beautiful strip of land right on the Mediterranean. basically right across from Monaco, south of France. They've been given billions and billions of dollars in aid. They could have built Ritz-Carltons and Meridian hotels and beautiful beaches and facilities, invited the world to come see Palestine. They could have educated their youth and taught them to read and write. Instead, they spent the billions and billions of dollars building 300 miles of tunnels that look better than any tunnels I've been in mines, in advanced mines. These tunnels that Hamas has built are better engineered than most Fortune 500 mining companies build their mine tunnels. That's where they put their money. They put their money into destroying Israel and killing Jews. So keep in mind, the Gaza Strip's not occupied. It hasn't been since Ariel Sharon pulled out in 2006. The Hamas has had the ability to do whatever they wanted. They could have built the most beautiful, amazing society, and instead they built a society of hate and terrorism and want and need and poverty. And that's what the two-state solution looks like so far. So it's hard to now go to the Israelis and say, keep up with the two-state solution. That was the original proposal from the United Nations in 1948. Palestine was partitioned, half for the Arabs, half for the Jews. The Arabs rejected it. They launched a war against Israel because they denied the two-state solution. And at every opportunity, in Maryland with President Clinton and Yasser Arafat, he walked away from a very generous two-state solution. Secretary Pompeo and I were involved, and others involved in the offer to the Palestinians of a very generous, contiguous West Bank with a rail and highway corridor to Gaza. Combined with billions, $60 to $80 billion in aid from the Gulf states and from the American taxpayers to build a beautiful Palestinian state. They walked away from it. They didn't want to talk about it. The reality is, we can talk all we want about the two-state solution. Until the Palestinians are committed to a two-state solution, and they're not, there is no two-state solution. So Israel's got to fight every day for its existence and fight every day for a refuge for the Jewish people. And if you ever thought the necessity of Israel as a refuge for Jews, what wasn't necessary in the modern society, look at the protests that we've seen in Sydney, gas the Jews. The protests we've seen in Paris, France, where President Macron banned them, but couldn't muster enough police to do so. And 500,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators turned out in Paris. In London, the same thing. Here in America, I mean, I saw it with my own eyes at Rice in Houston. So the Jews need a refuge, a place of refuge, and they need a safe place of refuge. And Israel has to exist. It's a moral imperative, not just a strategic imperative for the United States. And a two-state solution would be nice, but so far the Palestinians since 1948, 70 years now, have shown no interest in a real two-state solution. What they talk about and what they chant and all these horrific anti-Semitic marches that are out there is from the river to the sea, and that's a call for genocide. And look, I'm not going to stand by, and I don't know one on this call is going to stand by that happening again. And to their credit, the Biden administration and at least half the Democrat Party is taking the same position, but they've got a real problem on their side of the aisle because they're a bunch of vile anti-Semites and appeasers that would be probably happier if Israel didn't exist. But that the American people, the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats, want Israel to exist and understand it's a total necessity.
Well, it echoes what President Nixon said on that opening clip, that we stand with Israel because that's who we are as Americans. Alex Wong,
from Harry Truman on down.
That's right. Alex Wong, any additional thoughts on the anti-Semitism that we've seen erupt here and around the world?
I just wanted to come in on this, and I want to point out the tragic irony that those who are wearing decals of parachuting Hamas militants, terrorists, those who are cheering on Hamas, those who are tearing down posters of missing Israeli babies, they fashion themselves the most elite of thinkers. They fashion themselves as being on the vanguard of scholarly thinking, of theoretical thinking, post-colonialism. They view themselves as more enlightened than the rest of the population. And for all those mental gymnastics, for all of that posturing, for all of the high opinion that they hold themselves intellectually, the end point of their thinking is to lead them back to the oldest of prejudices, the most invidious of prejudices that is thousands of years old, one that should have been left in the dustbin of history long ago. And I have to point out that anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism they're adopting, attacks the very foundations of Judeo-Christian morality of Western civilization. This is a cancer on U.S. society. And it's one that we have to fight, and it's one that we have to expiate.
Very, very well said. I want to get to everybody with their final thoughts. Kim Reed, please come in.
Well, I just want to touch on a little bit of history and how grateful I am that on the evening of October 9th, 1973, President Nixon ordered the commencement of Operation Nickelgrass, which was an American airlift to resupply the Israelis of military equipment lost in the war. Very important part in helping Israel get to where it is today. And I look forward tomorrow night. There's going to be a Republican presidential debate. And I'm going to be listening closely to all the candidates and what their views are on this and what America's action is on this. Very, very, very important. I also hope that the Biden administration takes a different tack than appeasing the Iranians. And I trust that the Congress will be asking some tough questions about this. It must be condemned. And finally, I just want to say back to that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by that George Washington University professor. Let me just close by quoting him. Hamas is more than a terrorist organization intent on killing Jews and eradicating Israel. It is also a savvy international political player that has used the West as a staging ground for an influence operation aimed at policymakers, public opinion, and Muslim communities. So we have to really make Americans take a look in the mirror. And I really hope the left, a lot of think tanks, a lot of groups, they're not doing enough right now to hold the mirror up to what we're seeing. And it cannot be tolerated. But I pray for peace.
Beautifully said, Kim, and you raised another angle, which unfortunately we don't have time to get to tonight, which is the propaganda angle, which is something that we talk a lot about with communist China, but we rarely talk about with Iran, but is equally as important, and we might get to that in future seminars. Ambassador O'Brien, our co-chair, any final thoughts? And then we'll close with Secretary Pompeo.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I served with everyone on here, with Kim and Alex and you, Mary, and Mike, and we traveled a lot together. A lot of it was on Mike's plane before I got one. And I'm just grateful because I know all of you believe in America, and I know all of you believe in standing by our ally Israel and standing up against the anti-Semitism we're seeing. And I'm grateful for each of you. Mary, you did a great job moderating tonight, as usual. And listen, we're never again really means something. I know everyone here is totally committed to that. I am, and we're gonna keep it. We're gonna stay in the fight. We're not in office any longer, but we're gonna stay in the fight. And I'm privileged and honored to appear on the program with all of you tonight. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Secretary Pompeo, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I know there's still a lot to say. But any final thoughts on one or more of the themes that we've touched on in tonight's seminar?
So a couple things, I'll hit each of them quickly. Ambassador O'Brien spoke to this. I've now heard Secretary Blinken twice say that the Palestinian Authority will have to be part of the aftermath, a part of the when this is over. That is nuts. I mean, that is irrational and dangerous for the region, for Israel, and for the United States of America. So I hope that they won't go down the path of thinking that Abu Mazen somehow is going to become the leader that's going to lead this back. There's no way you can have a governing authority that is governed by someone who himself today is paying terrorists for slaying people inside of Israel. Second, we all commented on the statements that came out of the Gulf Arab world, and we all wished maybe for better. I think the worst statement that came out was from the United Nations, from the Secretary General himself, from somebody who's not sitting in the direct fire zone from Iranian missiles, as the Gulf Arab states are. Secretary General Guterres gave a statement that was the most indecent I saw from any world leader, and I think this tells us what I think many of us already knew. The UN is just an epic fail, and something's fundamentally got to shift, or the United States ought to reconsider how active it's ever going to be in that place. When it can't find the gumption to declare what Hamas did to be horrific and not try to balance it in some way, well, I'll just say that is not. If you go back and look at the Charter of the United Nations from the late 1940s, this is not remotely consistent to that. One more lesson. I think we should forever banish the idea that climate change is the most dangerous threat to the United States of America and to Israel. I think October 7th can once again confirm that is a mistake to lead with Secretary Kerry and not Secretary Blinken. And this administration continues to do that, even as we sit here today. And then finally, Israel's going to get this done, but it can only get it done if the American people are with them, so long as they need to have us with them. You know, we've given Israel the capacity to fire into Gaza. I wish we'd give the Ukrainians the capacity to fire into Russia. Think about this. Each nation attacked one place. We think it logical for them to actually go to where the enemy is. The other place, we're scared of our own shadow to go take out the very evil that killed innocent civilians in Europe, which really is the capstone idea. This problem set of evildoers foisting themselves and revanchist powers continue to try and expand can only be stopped by one set of leaders. And we can do it with great partners and friends. We built them out in Asia and Southeast Asia. We built them out in the Middle East. We can build coalitions that can withstand these evil forces, but it's going to take American leadership to do it. We have the ability to do it. We simply need the will and the leadership to execute it.
We need the will and the leadership to execute it. Great final words to conclude this month's seminar. I want to thank our co-chairs, Secretary Mike Pompeo and Ambassador Robert O'Brien, for being with us tonight. Thanks to our seminar members, to the Nixon Foundation, and of course, thanks to you for watching. I'm Mary Kissel. Good night.